Hey folks, we'll be getting started in just a couple of minutes. Just wanted to touch base and say hello. If you have questions, you can ask things in the chat, please. Otherwise, we're going to get you to keep your mics muted, please, just so we can reduce any noise. Our speaker is online tonight, the featured speaker, so you will have the best view or the best audio of the presentation. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. See you soon.
There we go. Do I have to start video on that? No, I guess not. We're on this video. We're on this camera. How's that? Test for sound. We're good. Yep. All right. Good evening, folks, and welcome to the RASC Winnipeg Center Incorporated's annual monthly meeting. And we'll just get it kicked off for the beginner session. But before we do, I'm just going to do our land acknowledgement. The lands from which our members and guests are joining us are located on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, OJ Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. And tonight for our beginner session, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and that's our very own Scott Young, Life and Death in the Winter Sky. Please welcome Scott Young.
Thanks, Dennis. Is this on? I didn't realize how cold it was going to be when I chose that title. This is not about how to dress for winter observing. That's a totally different talk, a valid one, but that would be Life and Death under the winter sky. And this is going to be Life and Death in the winter sky. And where is my presentation? That's okay. It's in here somewhere, right?
It would be, yeah, actually, if we go into the desktop, just go to the desktop, it's around the bottom right. Oh, way down bottom right. No, bottom right. Way, where we go?
Nope. Maybe. Let's see. Yes. Good. Okay.
And then you can share the screen.
Yeah.
Come through.
Yeah, it's all good.
Video on.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, sure. We'll bring the lights down a little bit. We'll just share the screen. Oh. So, Life and Death in the Winter Sky. What is that? An interesting fact about the winter sky is that we are, hang on, I just have to do this so I can share the screen. There we go. Is that it is the best sky to observe of all. It is basically got pretty much all the best stuff in it. And so it's a perfect time for us to look at not just individual objects, but a whole bunch of things and sort of how they fit together. So today we're going to take a look at the winter sky in a little bit of detail. Many of you will know a bunch of the constellations. You'll know how to find a few things in the sky. But when we look at the winter sky, we can actually see a snapshot of the life and death of stars, because stars are born, they come into existence, they evolve, they become teenagers and young adults and seniors. They eventually pass on. There are other generations that follow them. So there's a very similar kind of life cycle. Of course, it takes way longer. The problem is no human has been alive long enough to really see stellar evolution happening right in front of us. So the way that we do it is we take snapshots of all these different stars at different points in their life, and we try and figure that out. You can see all the stages of stellar evolution in the winter sky with your unaided eye. When I learned stellar evolution, they give me a diagram like this, and it's one of those flowchart kinds of things, and there's all sorts of branches on it, and this is actually super simplified, but there's still a lot of stuff there. So we're not going to worry too much about the details here, but suffice it to say that stars start out as hydrogen floating free in the universe. And for some reason, which we'll get into, that hydrogen collapses under gravity. And if there's enough of it, there's enough weight that presses down the center, the pressure, it goes up, the star ignites with a thermonuclear reaction, it shines, and it's a star. And then, depending on how big the star is, when it runs out of that hydrogen, a bunch of interesting things happen. So that's all this diagram really needs to refer to. There's another diagram they often show. It's called the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, after the two people that discovered it, Russell and Diagram. And somebody laughed this time. I used that joke last year and it didn't go anywhere. And it basically plots the color of a star versus its brightness. And there's some interesting patterns. And you might have heard of things like main sequence and the giant branch and things like that. That all comes from that diagram. It's more math than we're going to get into. Maybe that'll be a follow-up. Here's the winter sky. And you probably recognize some of the constellations there. Orion is coming up, really is the centerpiece of the winter sky, a beautiful thing to look at. You won't see three stars that close together, that bright, anywhere else in the sky. The belt of Orion, despite all the memes that it only gets 3-star rating and stuff like that, is unique in the sky. And nearby, there are some of the other brighter stars. And in the entire winter sky, there are many, many bright stars. These are some of the constellations that you can see at this time of the year that many people are familiar with. Taurus, the Bull, Gemini, the Twins, both zodiac constellations, and then Canis Major and Minor, the Dogs, Auriga, and so on. So this is sort of the centerpiece of the winter sky. And each of those constellations has one or more examples of how stars are born. So, the way that I pay attention to these constellations, because I live in the suburbs and I can't often see all the fainter stars, is by using what's called the winter hexagon. It's all those bright stars kind of together, looks like a football. So that can be a useful way to find things if you're in the suburbs like me. Oh, the neighbor's tree got cut down today. Oh, it was the best. Yes. I'm thrilled. It clears up 40 degrees of my southern horizon. I was out there cheering, and the guys thought of it anyway.
Return my chainsaw tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Well, apparently, if you just go and paint a little red spot on it when the hydro guys go by, no, just kidding. I wouldn't do that. Many of the bright stars have their own names that are more than just serial numbers or Greek letters or things like that. So the bright ones all have names, and I'm sure you've heard many of them. We'll skip over that because we got a little bit of a late start. We're going to start here. The Orion Nebula, or M42 and M43, for those of you that prefer the catalog number, probably the most studied object in the sky, certainly by amateur astronomers. Big, bright, beautiful. It's in the sword of Orion, and it represents the beginning stages of stellar evolution. You've probably heard someone say at some point the Orion Nebula is a stellar nursery because stars are being born there. In binoculars or a small telescope, it kind of looks like a little cluster of stars with a bunch of wispy, cloudy material around it. And as you get larger and larger telescopes, you see more and more detail and little clumps and dark clouds and things like that. It's an object that rewards any size instruments, and you can spend a lot of time observing it. So if you haven't, definitely go and spend the time. Once we start taking pictures of it with something more sensitive than our eyes, we see the colors. And usually they're sort of, oh, it looks terrible on that screen. On the main screen, it looks better. They are generally reddish colored because red is the signature color of hydrogen as it's glowing in space. This is a big cloud of glowing hydrogen gas, which is what you make stars out of. And in the center, right in about here, there's a tiny little cluster of stars called the trapezium. There are 4 stars that look like a little trapezium, I guess, but there's 2 other stars in there. There's actually about 1,000 stars within the area of the Orion Nebula. Some of them are as young as 300,000 years old. That is a drop in the bucket in terms of age as far as the universe goes. I mean, it's almost as old as Stan. Stan's the only guy older here than me, I think, so I can bug him. No, well, sorry, yeah, okay. I just like bugging Stan. The universe, the Orion Nebula, sorry, is full of these baby stars that are still surrounded by the huge cloud of dust and gas. There's about 2,000 solar masses in the Orion Nebula. Some of that's been made into stars, but most of it's still floating around there. And unfortunately, most of the rest of it's going to go to waste. In the next 100,000 years or so, the radiation pressure from those new stars will push all of this hydrogen back out into space and disperse it, and it will stop glowing and it will disappear. And all that will be left is the little cluster of stars, and all of that hydrogen that had been collected together, most of it is just going to go back out into space until the next stellar formation event, which is kind of interesting. And that's pretty fast. 100,000 years on the scale of the universe is pretty fast. So 100,000 years from now, we won't be looking at the Orion Nebula. We'll be looking at a star cluster. Now, we don't want to wait that long, most of us, so let's look at a different star cluster. Up from the belt of Orion is the constellation of Taurus, and just beyond, at the top of that is the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters, the hole in the sky, depending on what story you want to go along with. It's a beautiful cluster of stars. It's got about 1,000 stars in it. And it's got some of this dust and gas around. Now, I always thought that the dust there, that blue stuff that the light is reflecting from, was left over from the nebula that made those stars. Turns out that that is not the case. The Pleiades have been around for about 100 million years. That's still really young for stars. These are baby stars. These are like infants. But 100 million years is way too long for any nebulosity to still be there, because the stellar pressure of the light and the radiation would have blown it all away. So it turns out the Pleiades, as they're moving through the galaxy, they're going through the plane of the galaxy, they just happen to be in a dusty spot right now, which I thought was really cool, because I literally learned that 2 days ago when I was researching this for the talk. So that's kind of a neat thing. But the Pleiades, also a wonderful thing to see. And this is how most stars form, in a cluster like this. Another cluster, another cluster just below them is the Hyades cluster, which is a little bit closer, so it doesn't look quite as dense, but it's a similar kind of thing. Down below in Orion's knee over here is the star Rigel. Rigel is a blue supergiant star, and it's only around 8 million years old. So it's actually younger than the Pleiades, but it formed obviously not in a big cluster, but it formed in a different situation, so that it is essentially by itself. But it's what we call a blue supergiant star. And so this is a very crude representation of the size of the sun compared to Rigel. That's why it's so bright in the sky. It is big and very, very hot and very, very blue. So this is a very young star. It's probably not going to be around for all that much longer. It is so big that it burns its fuel really, really fast. It'll run out of hydrogen, and it will eventually turn into a supernova and explode, and probably result in a neutron star or a black hole or something exotic like that. So Orion is not going to look like this for very long, another few million years, and Orion will need a new kneecap. Now, nearby, we have a different kind of giant star. This is the star Aldebaran in Taurus. Apparently, whenever I lean forward, it makes noise, hey? Aldebaran is a red supergiant star, very, very large as well, but cooler. Now, this is a star that's been around a little bit longer. It started off somewhat like the sun, a little bit bigger, and it has gone through its life. It's burned up a bunch of the hydrogen that's in the core, and it starts to run out of that. And the step that happens for these stars is that they expand out and they cool, and they turn into these red giant stars. So that's sort of the evolutionary path that we see for a star. You're born from a nebula into either a star cluster or a small group of stars. If you're a really hot, bright star, you burn really quickly and then you explode and then you're done. But if you're not quite that big, your life cycle will allow you to live longer, and you will turn into a red giant like this. So Aldebaran is one of the largest stars you can see with your eye. It's quite a big star, and it's not part of the star cluster that it's right next to. It's not part of the Hyades. It just happens to be in the same area. Now here's another star that is a little bit different. We saw stars that were forming in a big cluster like the Pleiades. We saw sort of the individual stars. Capella is a bright star that is much more than it appears. It's actually 4 stars, all in orbit, gravitationally bound. There are 2 big yellow, what we call subgiant stars. They're starting to run out of hydrogen. They're starting to grow, but they haven't quite got to that red giant phase. And then those 2 orbit each other very, very close. And then at a distance from that, there are these two little orange red dwarfs down at the bottom here, and they orbit each other, and the pair orbits the large pair. So you've got these 4 stars, and this gives you a sense, again, there's the sun in the middle for comparison. So some of these stars are visible through telescopes. You can actually split these stars as double stars in some cases. But this is a group of stars where you didn't have the star cluster, but there was obviously more than enough gas to create one star. And so the challenge is to sort of figure out what are the starting conditions that give you all these different varieties of stars. And why is it that most stars are not single like the sun? We used to think, oh, well, the solar system, there's a star, and then there's a nice organization of planets, and that's the way the universe is. And as we started looking and discovering more, we realized that our solar system is very unusual in terms of a lot of different factors. So we're kind of the freaks of the universe. I take pride in that. Okay, here's another star that many people are familiar with. If you go down from the belt of Orion, you wind up at Sirius, the dog star. This is a star that, as soon as it starts coming up in the evening, I start getting UFO calls at the planetarium because it flashes red and yellow and green and blue and stuff like that. It's beautiful. All the stars do that. It's just that Sirius is bright enough that its twinkling, which is all that is bright enough to stimulate our color sensors in our eye. So you can actually see the colors. All the stars are doing that. You just can only see it with Sirius. And because it's lower in our sky, it twinkles quite a bit. So Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. And you might think, oh, well, we've seen some nice big supergiant stars. We've seen some hot stars and things like that. What's Sirius? Sirius is a boring star. Sirius is a couple of times bigger than the sun. It's not even twice as heavy as the sun. It's 1.7 solar masses. It's a little bit hotter, so it's got that going for it. But the only reason we see Sirius is because it's in our backyard. It's only 8 light years away. The other stars that we looked at, Capella's around 40, Aldebaran's around 500, very much farther away. And we're seeing those stars over long distances because they're physically large and bright and impressive. We only see Sirius because of the coincidence of it being in our backyard. Still, it's a cool star. And it had a problem back in the 1840s or so. They would, by measuring the motions of the stars relative to the other stars, you can kind of figure out how they're moving and things like that. And Sirius's motion was wobbling. And so the thought was, well, there must be something going around it that gravity is pulling it off. That's how we discover planets nowadays. But back in the 1800s, we couldn't detect that level of precision. But they did predict that something was there. And a couple decades later, they found the white dwarf, Sirius B, that orbits it. A white dwarf is a star with the mass of the sun compressed down into the radius of the Earth. So you've got something that is massive, but it's compressed down. How do you make a star like that? They get made when stars turn into those red giants, and eventually the red giant outer envelope just sort of keeps floating off and disappears, and all that's left is the core,
which is a white dwarf. So things have actually gotten to the point where you can see the white dwarf around Sirius fairly easily. It's in an orbit that's kind of elliptical, and in the last few years, it's gotten easier to see. So that's something you can actually spot in a telescope. You can see a white dwarf, which is kind of neat. That'll be the smallest and the smallest star that you'll probably ever be able to see. Now, there's a couple of other stars in the winter sky. We're gonna go through some of them a little bit quick here, just because we're might be a little short of time. Procyon is in Canis Minor. Canis Minor is the lamest constellation ever. It is made of two stars connected by an imaginary line. It is literally a dash in the sky, and apparently that is the smaller of Orion's hunting dogs. Okay. Procyon is nice and bright, so it stands out at least. It's part of that winter hexagon. And interestingly, it's kind of like Sirius. It is a star a bit bigger than the sun, and it has a white dwarf companion going around it. That's kind of just a cosmic coincidence. It's a little bit farther away from us, and so it looks a little bit dimmer, but it's the same kind of situation. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say one thing about Sirius back here. So if Sirius has a star, the main star, and then a white dwarf, and white dwarfs come from red giants, does that mean that originally there was a white star and a red giant in orbit around each other? Yes. And someone found a reference that goes back to around 200 BC, where they called Sirius a red star. And so the thinking was that when the red giant was there and it's disappeared since then, and now we just see the white dwarf that's left? No, it's a compelling kind of idea, but the time frame just doesn't match. If that was the case, if there was a red giant there only a few thousand years ago, there would be nebulosity and dust and gas and stuff left from that red giant. You couldn't just have a white dwarf star that doesn't have anything else around it. So the color controversy about Sirius has been pretty firmly settled in terms of, no, that isn't the case. But it's kind of cool to think that some of these things might actually happen on the kinds of time frames that humans can relate to. I mean, billions of years is hard to figure out, but recently there's this meme going around saying, oh, I just found out that this star is younger than sharks. Sharks have been on the planet for 450 million years, and this star is only 300 million years old, and it's a big deal. Lots of stars are younger than that. Most of the stars we've talked about are younger than sharks. Most of the stars, some of the stars we've talked about are younger than primates. Stars seem eternal to you and I because we only last this long. But when you start looking at the history of our planet actually spans a pretty good chunk of the universe's history. And so things have changed since there has been stuff here on the Earth. Okay, let me jump back to where I was here, sorry. Castor and Pollux. These are two stars in the Gemini, the twins, and I always mix up which one is which because we always introduce them as Castor and Pollux, and you never get to know them individually. So like the typical twin kind of issue. The way that you can remember it is that Castor is closest to Capella and Pollux is closer to Procyon. Most of you know that. If you didn't, now you know it and you'll never forget it again. So you'll always remember which star is which. Castor is a multiple star system. It's got 6 stars, 3 pairs orbiting each other, orbiting around their common center of mass. 2 big hot blue stars, 4 red dwarfs. And all of the red dwarfs are what are called flare stars. So they send off all sorts of bursts of radiation and nasty things like that. Really, really active star system. And I think I haven't looked at it recently, but the separation between the 2 brightest components is about 3 arc seconds. So you could probably split that in a telescope pretty easily, I think. Is Castor on the, James, you guys were out doing the double star stuff at the beginning of the month. Is Castor on that list? Yeah, okay. Definitely you know, we look at double stars, and I've always thought, well, why look at double stars? And then you start realizing what they represent, these complicated systems. They're actually pretty cool to track down in the sky. So Castor, 6 stars. Its twin, Pollux, should be exactly the same, right? Pollux is 1 star. It's in fact one of the rare stars that is just a single star. It's big. It's much bigger than our sun, much brighter, but it is a single star. Now, these stars that we've been talking about here are sort of in the middle of their lives. You have stars that have been around, the early star cluster ones were a few 100 million years. Now we're getting into 500 million years, a billion years. These are stars in their adult lifetime. Then you get to a star like Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse or Yat al-Ghuz is the way it's supposed to be in Arabic. Apparently, somebody translated it wrong. There's not supposed to be a B there at all. But Betelgeuse is probably the most famous red supergiant star. I couldn't fit it properly on the screen, so this is a sense of, you know, how big it is compared to the sun. For another scale, if you take the sun down to a single pixel and you put the orbit of the planets around it, Betelgeuse would encompass all the way out past the asteroid belt. That's a big star. Now our sun will never get quite that big when it runs out of fuel and turns into a giant. The Betelgeuse is a big star, so it's got a lot of mass, so it expands to a huge amount when it reaches the end of its life. We'll only expand out to maybe the Earth's orbit. The sun will expand only to that size. So our sun will never get as big as Betelgeuse. But this is what happens to stars near the end of their life. Here it is again. And when the star runs out of fuel completely, you've got these huge envelopes of gas that have puffed out, and then the energy in the center runs out of fuel, and all of that energy that was pushing out suddenly instantly turns off, and all of the weight there collapses back under gravity. And while this star has spent, you know, a billion years expanding out to the size of a red giant, when the energy turns off, it collapses in about 1 second. That stuff falls just very, very quickly, bounces back, and you get a supernova explosion. There was a paper a couple of years ago saying, oh, Betelgeuse is going to explode as a supernova any day now. That paper has not made it out of peer review yet, and no one's replicated the results. So I think that we don't have to worry about it going supernova anytime soon. Next 10,000 years, for sure, but they were sort of saying, yeah, maybe this year. So Betelgeuse relatively soon, but not something that we can sort of plan our observing around. However, when it does go, it will go well beyond just creating a white dwarf. There'll be enough material left that it'll crush down to make either a neutron star or a black hole. So again, the 2 brightest stars in Orion in, you know, some number of years are going to be gone, and we'll have to come up with completely new constellations. Okay, there's 2 other quick objects here because we're right out of time. When a star is just finished being a red giant and the outer layers are puffing off and all that's left is a white dwarf, that transition stage is called a planetary nebula. It has nothing to do with planets, but I guess it looked kind of like the planet Neptune. So when people were looking through their telescopes, they said, oh, it's a planetary nebula. We have terrible names for things. So planetary nebulas are, again, the end life stage of a star that was not big enough to explode as a supernova. It was small enough to just sort of go through the red giant stage and then slowly fade away and leave a white dwarf. So that's the Clown Face Nebula. It's over in the constellation of Gemini, and you can see that in a small telescope. And if you have a small telescope, you can also see the other kind of nebula created by stars, star death. The Crab Nebula is the remnants of a supernova explosion. There's a star that exploded in the year 1054, and so 1,000 years later or so, we have this huge cloud of wreckage surrounding it. And the remainder of that star down in the very, very center is a pulsar, which is a neutron star that's spinning really, really fast, 15 times a second. and it sends out a searchlight beam that flashes its brightness. Really beautiful object to see. And again, the traumatic end point of a star, of a star's life there in the sky. Oh, and there's a cute little animation of the X-ray jet shooting out of that pulsar area from the Chandra observatory. So in the winter sky, we have brand new stars. We have stars being born in the Orion Nebula. We have star clusters. We have a variety of different kinds of stars, big stars, little stars. We have old stars, we have young stars, and we have stars reaching the end of their life, and we have examples of stars that have died in very, very different ways. The sun has another 4 billion years of fuel or so, so I'm personally not worried too much about its untimely death, but we can see a lot of this stuff from the winter, in the winter sky. And so get out there and take a look at some of these things and try and, you know, do a little Google search on some of the stars, and it's amazing the variety of objects that are out there that we can see. 2 of those stars had planets around them as well, and likely some of the others do. And we're discovering more of that. Any questions? Gee. Oh, yes. Back in 2019, Betelgeuse faded. It's a variable star because it's got star spots and because it's got this big envelope, it can actually get brighter and fainter. And it faded in 2019 to 2020. And there are a couple of thoughts, but one is that there was an eruption of material that came out and then cooled and became basically like a sort of eclipsed part of the star and made it not very visible. So it dropped almost a magnitude and then came back to where it was. That was why they were saying, oh, that must be a sign it's going to explode. But now that doesn't seem, nobody seems to agree with that. So good question. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Scott. So again, thank you very much, Scott, especially for sharing your story about dropping your tree and bringing all the buzz about the night star, winter stars in the sky. And the only question I got for you, did it bring you a lot of relief, the fact that it wasn't going to relief?
Yes, indeed.
I'm not going to apologize. I like doing that. Here you go. All right. So again, we just had our beginner session. Thank you very much, Scott. And so again, tonight we have our beginner session, our welcome meeting welcome that we're going to go through in a second, some announcements, what's up with Bryan Stach, and then we'll have a break, what's new with Dr. Michelle Boyce. Our main presentation tonight is Dr. Allison, gotta move because I can't read, Man, from the UBC, Euclid, Galaxies, and Perhaps My Path to Becoming a Professional Astronomer. And then, of course, everyone is invited over to Boston Pizza once the meeting is over. So things just to pass on, a few announcements. The Lockhart Planetarium at the U of M is open, and please just go to their website for more information. We encourage those that are out there on the internet to maybe look at it and take a peek and come on down and see what the Lockhart Planetarium has to show us. Our observatory committee is going to give if you're interested in helping with things in that, Dr. Michelle Boyce, you can contact her. Our fundraising committee is Wing Wong, and again, he's here tonight for those that would like to talk to him. And speaking of fundraising, at our banquet, which we'll talk about briefly in that, some of the things we'll have for sale as a fundraiser for Telescopes for Kids are these postcards. And if you have astro imaging that you would like to have put onto these, please contact Wing and they'll make arrangements so that we can, as long as you're comfortable letting us use this as a fundraiser for that particular item, we greatly appreciate your images. And they'll be available for sale at our potluck that's coming up and also available tonight at the meeting. Am I still on? I can't tell. I didn't drop off, did I?
share it on the.
Okay, just a sec here. How do we get back online there?
Here.
Yeah, it just stopped.
Yeah. Okay, that should be it. Please.
We get lost again. Okay, and for those who may not be aware of it, we have a telescope loaner program. And Mike Krakis is who you would contact for that, and that's a benefit of being a member of the RASC Winnipeg Center. The RASC seasonal potluck, the 20th of January. I've got some more information that'll follow this. Telescope for kids, Scott Young is the person coordinating that. And again, we are looking for donations. There is I forgot what it's called. What's that for donations? What's the site? A GoFundMe page, thank you. And if you're interested, please go there. Or if perhaps you would care to donate an appropriate size telescope for a young person, or perhaps you have a slightly used or good used scope that you'd like to donate, we gladly take that. Please let us know. And again, Scott Young is our coordinator for the Telescopes for Kids program. And that will kick off after our potluck on the 20th. 2024 budget, we'll just briefly show it, but it is also available on the website now for our membership to see what the plans are for next year as far as finances go. January 19th, Wild Outside event volunteers. Damon, did you want to speak to that briefly, or?
Yeah, sure. Wild Outside's outreach really with the Wildlife Federation asked us to do an event on the 19th, which is the date for the potluck. Still use a couple more volunteers. It'll be in the evening from about 6 to 9. They did contact me back today. The 26th was originally going to be, it got clouded over on the 19th, but now it'll be the 27th. I'll have to adjust the insurance on it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And again, Damon is our person to contact for that. He'd like a couple more volunteers if possible to work with Wild Outside, which is affiliated with the World Wildlife Federation. Telescope tune-up, March 23rd, James Fast, and there's another slide, and I'll have James talk to that briefly in a moment. Our AGM, again, it's been announced that is going to be on March 8th, 2024. At the AGM, one of the functions of the AGM as well is the elections, nominations. Our nomination committee is myself, Bryan, Stach, and Stan Runge. The positions that are open is the treasurer, sorry, I keep saying that, the secretary position. There are 4 director positions and 1 counselor position. For those people who don't know the difference, is the counselor position does not have to meet the requirements of the Manitoba Incorporations Act to be named. They have the same voting rights and privileges as any other member of council, but a director, you have to meet the requirements, which are basically you're an adult, you're not an incorporation, and you're not bankrupt. Those are the basic ones, I believe, for minimum requirements. And again, they've been posted. Yeah, again, if you have any questions or would like to volunteer and let your name stand for one of those positions, please contact either myself, Stan Runge, and Bryan Stach. Our volunteer chair for Sprucewood Star Party, I'd like to announce again, Damon. Damon, hold your hand up. And it may seem strange because here we are, our first real winter blast. Looking for it. If you're interested in volunteering to help set up and run the Sprucewood Star Party, please contact Damon, and he'll let you know what we could do and put together his committee. So again, thank you very much, Damon, for coming on. And a big thank you again to Sylvia Graca, who has for many years run it and is now handed over the reins to another person. So again, thank you both to Sylvia and to Damon for taking on the new role. Thank you very much. Workshop ideas, and we'll be talking in a moment. I'll call Michelle up to talk briefly about one of our first, well, actually we got 2 people coming up to talk about workshops coming up. If you have any ideas of a workshop you'd like to have, and again, this is a member benefit, please contact Stan Runge, so he can either, if you're interested in running a workshop, he can either coordinate it, or we could also give him an opportunity to try and recruit somebody to run the workshop. So again, it's a member benefit. So the reason we're asking for it is so that we find out what you want, what you'd like to have put on as a workshop. And then the council will do our best to put that together and make it happen. Stan, anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, we've got the two, and I consider James is a telescope tune-up, kind of like a workshop.
Yep.
You show up, they're longer, they're 3 hours, so, you know, there's more meat to it, more to learn. We're gonna be involved with a lot more people, so it's similar to what we do in the summertime at the Spruce Woods when we walk around and look at telescopes. People come away learning a lot more about what scopes are out there, et cetera, et cetera. I want to mention that we also have, aside from those two, we have 2 more sessions that are going to be developed, workshops, and Scott's going to be providing them. One is called Choosing Your First Telescope, and the other one is How to Use Your First Telescope. So we're going to get to that easy, early of a level, and then we'll also have later on more complicated one. I want to do one on finding objects in the night sky, which includes star hopping. So we have got some ideas now of things that we want. You may personally say, oh, you know what I would like to see? This and this and this. So come talk to me about it, and we'll see if we can establish some more workshops that meet the needs of the group.
Great, thank you, Stan. So for those online, if you perhaps you may not have heard it, so the sort of some of the additional workshops that are coming up as well would be choosing your first telescope and how to use your first telescope, and star hopping. So those are some of the ones that are being considered as well. So I'll just ask Michelle to come up and she'll talk. Oh, sorry, James. James, come up and talk about the spring telescope tune-up, and then I believe Michelle should be right after that.
That?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm James. We're announcing this really far in advance. Yes, it's still January. The telescope tune-up, which we ran last year, kind of towards the end of March. We've got a date for that already. It's the 23rd, Saturday. And the idea here is for members to come bring your telescopes, whether you're brand new to the hobby or you've been in the hobby for a long time, to share some ideas, to just to get together, to set up our gear, get it kind of tuned up and ready to go for a prime observing season. Some of the things that we've brainstormed and kind of would like to offer at that would be like cleaning your optics, whether it's your eyepieces or maybe your objective lenses, perhaps a mirror washing demonstration, collimating your optics, setting up a go-to mount, and you can see the list there. A stellarium tutorial. The sites, it's going to be at Eastview Community Church, which is inside the perimeter right at the end of Henderson Highway. So it's technically East St. Paul. A big low horizon, so if the weather is amenable, we could do some solar observing. And Jupiter is going to be in the daytime, probably about 25 degrees away from the sun. So we'll have to see kind of how that plays out. Maybe we'll get a chance to do some daytime planet hunting. I'd love to do a demonstration of that. And yeah, just to get together. So again, this is an event for members of the club. Now, if you have someone in your family or you have a friend who's really interested in this and would kind of like get interested, please bring them along. And we'd like to kind of use this as a way to show people what the club is all about and get them involved in that. So if you have any questions, come talk to me or to Stan if you'd like. If you've got other ideas, would love to hear them. Say, you know, hey, James, we should have maybe a swap table at this event. What would actually be even better is, hey, James, I would like to run a swap table at the event. So open to all kinds of different ideas and suggestions. So put it on your calendar, March 23rd. It's going to be nice and sunny and warm that day already. I know it. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And our first workshop is going to be presented by Dr. Michelle Boyce, and she's coming up to talk a little bit about that.
Hi, so I'm giving a workshop on planetary imaging. Actually, I shouldn't say imaging, it's image processing. So it assumes you've already got a video, say, of a planet, and then we're gonna process it. That being said, videos will be provided for people to work with. And we're gonna be going through a workflow. So this is a 3-hour workshop. It's January 28th. It's downtown. Parking is free on Sunday. But basically I'll give a brief presentation about data acquisition, and then we will actually process an image through this workflow that's shown here. Windows workflow, which is pip, AutoStacker, Registax, and GIMP. You'll need those installed. You can contact me if you're interested and want to install those. And for those on rare occasions with a Mac, you can install Linkios, and I can sort of guide you through that. I'll also talk about a bit of basic imaging theory behind these apps, especially wavelets. That's one of the tougher things to do. So this workshop is kind of designed for beginners. It actually follows a YouTube video that's given by Michael Martin in Late Night Astronomy on YouTube channel. So basically I'm following that as a workflow. Now this workshop is for beginners, but even people who are experienced, I encourage them to come because I see this as a sharing of knowledge. I'm not an expert at imaging, but I'm getting pretty good at it, and I've sort of taught it in courses, so I have an idea of how to present the material to people. And it would be nice if other people that have experience in image can come and share that information and help others. So I'm hoping it'll be sort of a community thing. And there's my contact information. Okay.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
Those are my images at the bottom.
So again, we're very excited to be this year to be focusing on trying to get more and more workshops or get the workshop program going. It's also a method for us to provide some mentorship to some of the newer members in particular, or the people just starting out in these areas. So we're quite pleased to be able to offer these services. So again, the RASC Winnipeg Center Seasonal Potluck is January 20th. It starts at 6 o'clock. It's at the Launch Co-working Space Southside, Suite 200 at 1460 Chevrolet Boulevard, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Members and guests are welcome. Please park in the spots that have no name or business attached to them. We ask that you bring your favorite potluck meal, snack, desserts. There was a spreadsheet sent out just so we had maybe a bit of an idea that what was coming. If you haven't put your stuff down on there, please do. And again, but we're also expecting it's a typical potluck. People are going to show up, bring what they bring. So we're looking forward to seeing you there. Also, we ask that you bring your favorite astro images if you want to share. There'll be a screen set up for them just to scroll through. And for those that do travel by bus, it's very close to the bus stop. It's right by the building. And as I mentioned, one of the fundraisers, there will be a 50-50, as well as, again, astro images for sale. If you have astro images that you'd be willing to share and allow to be sold at this event as a fundraiser for telescopes for kids, please contact Wing. Wing, did you have anything else you wanted to maybe mention today, or have I covered enough of it?
Just that there is an online form.
Oh, right. Yes, the online form for members that you can submit your photos. And again, Wing's also been, just want to point it out, very busy. I was poking fun at him a little bit last night at the council meeting on social media. If you get his feeds and some of the things that he puts up there, we're trying to generate so that people understand and raise the funds for telescopes for kids. So if you can repost, I'm saying that right? Repost the social media things to deal with it. I'm not a social media person, so yeah, like, comment, and share. There you go. please do that so that the more people know about the program. It's a great program. We've run it for a couple of years. We'd really like to be able to eventually grow it out to be able to share our science and our love of astronomy with as many youth out there in Manitoba as possible. So again, thank you very much for those who have already supported it and for those that will continue to support and begin to support. The budget, I'm just flashing it, but it's a lot easier if you go to our website now. It's posted on there. And just so people know, the budget is not something that's voted on to be accepted. At the annual general meeting, the financials will be presented for the last year. The budget is just information on what the council plans to do and move forward. And basically, it's a break-even budget. We'd just like to remind everybody about groups.io. And if you're interested on the different groups, anybody who gets registered through national will be automatically uploaded and invited to groups.io. So you might have got, if you're new and you've got this funny email about groups.io, no, it's not spam. If it's RASC Winnipeg, we encourage you to go to the site, and then there's several subgroups for different interests, imaging, things like that. So that is where, if you're interested in those areas, you would sign up for that, and you would only get emails from that particular group, unless there was something that council needed to share with everybody, such as the potluck. We would send out one email. So the idea is that the main email list is only used by council to share information that we know everyone should know about. And then if you have an interest, you would join the other interest groups. Members observing night, we made the grand decision yesterday with the cold and everything else. It is not on tomorrow night. It is canceled. So it's just the weather's come in and we're not 100% sure if the road would have been cleared, but it certainly wasn't a good night just with the extreme cold weather that's happening. What I'd like to do now is introduce Bryan Stach and have him come up to talk about what's up. Please welcome Bryan Stach.
So when you're done, they go into break till 8:30. Okay, because I'm just gonna leave. Okay, all right. Yeah, just get your stuff. Yeah. I just gotta run. Okay, yeah, Julie's gonna do something. Okay.
Me.
All right, can everyone hear me? All right. Should be good. Okay, thank you. All right, so let's talk about what's happening for January of this year. The overall doesn't look very good for the weather, but I'll break it down a little later on. And there we go. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the planets. As for the planets, we only had the 3 planets going to be visible in the morning. Mars is pretty much going to be deadlocked in it early in the morning for the rest of the year. So it's going to be early in the morning, whereas Venus and Mercury, they're not going to be so visible. Venus will be, but not Mercury. As for the rest of the planets, for Jupiter and Saturn, it'll be mostly evening planets. But Jupiter will begin its pro-retrograde motion against the stars of Aries. So it's going to be pretty bright with a magnitude of 2.4. But it's what I have here is that Jupiter will appear, especially colorful in the telescopes, in the early part of the evening. So that'll be kind of nice to see. As for the January events, I was going to put down for the potluck of next week, but I think it's quite clear. Of course, we have the new moon on. Well, that actually it was yesterday. But for the other stuff, like Saturn is going to be 2 degrees north of the moon. I'll break that down a little bit more. Jupiter will be 3 degrees south of the moon. And of course, on January the 20th, which is the potluck, the moon is going to be 0.8 degrees south of the Pleiades, which is otherwise known as M45. The full moon is on the 25th. Now, you can't see here, but Mercury, can I move this with my finger? No, I can't. I don't, this is not a Surface Pro.
Yeah, you can use the mouse and move that.
Okay. There you go. I got used to my Surface Pro. Okay. So as you can see here, Mercury is going to be 0.2 degrees north of Mars. That's going to be pretty early in the morning. I do have it on the slide. We'll break it down, but it's going to be too close to the sun, I think, to observe, but we'll have a look at it. There we go. Okay, so on January the 14th, I didn't anything to do with the members night yet, tomorrow because of the cloud situation. So as you can see here, Saturn's gonna be 2 degrees. We're gonna have a nice thin crescent moon, but if you look at the night before, right, it's gonna be even thinner. But so it'll be kind of nice event on Saturday, on January the 14th. As for this event here, is near Orion. You can see Rigel. I don't have a star thing, but you kind of get the idea. Rigel, which is part of Orion there. I started to see a pattern here for the next 3 days, which I'll point out. We have a lot of Starlinks, so I thought it'd be kind of nice with all the events that's going on here. So I'll break it down again. So I have Starlinks roughly. It's going to start at 6:45 p.m. So again, on January 18th, we have Jupiter 3 degrees south of the moon. But again, Starlinks, it's going to happen around 6:45. I thought it'd be kind of nice because it's going to be covering that the event that's happening. So again, right? So again, I don't have the laser pointer, but of course you got Pleiades up there on top. We've got the moon and the Jupiter. Again, there's a laser pointer right there. Right over there. Oh, thank you. Oh, I guess I can do that. Okay, thank you. Okay, so again, we have Starlinks here that's happening here. We got the Pleiades, Uranus. It's again, it hasn't really moved for the last couple of months. Again, it's between Jupiter and the Pleiades. So since it's a faraway planet, you do have some reference points. So if you want to have a look for a planetary, that would be the one right there. I think it would be kind of easy for everyone to have a look at it if you have looked at Uranus, but it's not really an ideal planet to look for. Oh, I went too far. Anyways. Sorry about that. Sorry, I apologize for that. Okay, so here, moon's going to be 0.8 degrees south of the Pleiades system, or in other words, as we know, it's M45. Again, same time, different dates, January the 20th. We're going to have a lot of Starlinks there. I thought it'd be kind of nice. Again, as we're covering this same area again. So that would be a nice event on January the 20th. Again, the moon's going to be 0.8 degrees south of the Pleiades. We've got this. Okay, this is what I was going to talk about, the 2 planets, well, the 3 planets, Venus, Mercury, and Mars. Mars is going to be a deadlock for the whole year. So if we were to look at it, they're going to be right about there. That's Mercury and Mars, but you can see it's pretty washed out. So I'm guessing because it'd be what, the next half hour, next hour or so, the sun is going to start to rise. So again, that's supposed to be Mercury, right about there. Then we have Mars right about there. They're pretty close together. So that's Mars. As you can see here, at least we got Venus. So Venus will be pretty much dominating for the early morning. Now, what about the weather? Well, it doesn't look promising, and I try to look at this so many different ways. There's so many different models. Again, El Nino is affecting the whole weather system here. I mentioned this before last time, that again, it's going to begin mild, and then it's going to get pretty frigid cold. But so here's the temperature. This kind of changed again. Just a few days ago, this looked really warm compared to this. Now it looks like it's going to be really cold for the next week. Again, it's going to be roughly minus 20 degrees for the evening with the wind chill factor of maybe minus 35 or so. But again, this changed. But as you can see here for next weekend, it's going to rise up to minus 10. And then it's going to continue on to rise. As for the cloud coverage, as you can see here, again, this kind of changed every now and then, but it's going to be pretty much partly cloudy to mostly cloudy for the month, actually. We might have a few days that are going to be clear. You can see towards the end here that it looks like it's going to be clear. But it's going to be kind of like what we refer to as sucker holes. Anyways, let's try the 14-day, 16-day forecast here again. You see here, this weather here again, it's going to be right on the average minus 20 degrees. As for the cloud coverage, you were to make sense of this, again, it's gonna be mostly cloudy. With maybe the odd times of these little sucker holes here and here. But, again, it doesn't look promising, but again, it's gonna be cold, so I plan to do some stacking my images to keep me busy during the next time. Okay, now for the 14-day forecast, what I have here is, again, just kind of give you an idea, this is for the night part of it. This one day, we do have a possibility of a clear sky here, but again, it's gonna be frigid cold here, the beginning of this week, but you see it gradually gets warmer and warmer. So by the time of February hits around, we're gonna warm up, but February doesn't look very good. If the forecast holds again for that model, apparently it's going to be there'd be some rain in February. So it doesn't look very promising. And I think, what I try to do is, okay, let's try to make sense of what I'm trying to say in terms of weather. Yes, it's going to be extreme cold for this week. Next week, it's going to start warming up. It's going to be mostly cloudy. So just kind of give you a breakdown of the weather for this month. And I think that's it. That's all I have for January 2024 for what's up in January. All right, thank you.
Okay, so not sure if you can hear me. My name's Judy Anderson. Dennis asked me to take over for him. He had to go somewhere. So I believe that we're now going to have our break and then we'll come back at 8:30. Okay? There's coffee available and tea at the little stand outside, Super U, which St. John's College runs. And they're staying open just for us. Thanks so much. I'm gonna text email Allison. She wants to be informed.
Don't forget that, Allison.
Yeah, but I don't know if she's staying at work to do this. She's 2 hours ahead of us. So. You think I should shorten it? That's what
We're going till 8:20.
I think we'll come back at 8:20, not 8:30, okay?
Oh, yeah, you're the auditor.
Okay. We're going to come back and reconvene at 8:20, not 8:30. Sorry.
I just want to grab a drink.
Yeah, sure. Dr. Mann hasn't joined that, so I'm assuming.
Yeah, I'm just telling her
Oh,
that we're running a
pardon me.
little bit late.
Oh.
Because Michelle still hasn't talked. I don't know how, she usually takes 15 minutes or something. Said she forgot.
Yeah, video is on, mic is on.
Okay, now we're going to have What's New by Michelle Boyce.
Okay, let's hope this works. Can people hear me? Okay, good. Seems I've been having good luck with these things now. Never used to. I don't know how much people keep track of astronomy news, of which there's a whole flora of things. Does anyone recognize what's going on here? No, okay, so we have I like to call it booties. I know it's bates or whatever, but I call it booties because it sounds cute. So booties here. And then we have the Big Dipper. And you can see this is actually a ring of galaxies. And apparently, and I think that's right, you could fill that with 15 moons. That's how big it is. And then this is an arc of galaxies. So these are large scale structures that were discovered. So I'm actually going to spend time talking about these large scale structures, maybe a bit about the cosmology behind them. It's interesting because we're starting to see signs that are saying that our understanding of cosmology is we're starting to tease the corners of how we understand the cosmos. And so we may have to rethink things. Okay, so will you advance? Oh, there we go. So this is that other ring structure is called the Big Ring, and this here is a Sloan Digital Sky Survey image of it. I put some circles here just to emphasize things. So here's that ring structure, and this here indicates that there's a lot of quasars in the background, and quasars are just very early universe, highly energetic. I'll call them cores of galaxies or black holes, but they're very powerful beacons. And all these little things here are galaxies. So it's interesting. Basically, it was a PhD student, Alexia Lopez, that working with his supervisor and a collaborator, they were analyzing this data, and then she looked at it and went, hey, this is a ring. And it's a big ring. It's 9.2 billion light years away. And just as a reminder, light year is the distance it takes light to travel in 1 year. The spherical influence of our solar system is about 2 light years across. And our galaxy is 100,000 light years, and this thing's 1 billion light years away, just to give you a sense. And so we're looking backwards in time, and this expands 1.3 billion light years. Now, this challenges our current understanding of cosmology and the models dealing with cosmology, because really those models kind of indicate structures of about 1.2 billion years. So this is starting to stretch that, our understanding, start to challenge or tease at our understanding. And that's what astronomy is all about, especially astronomy has these huge error bars and uncertainties. And as we get better and better and look at more and more things, we have to refine things. Okay. So how did they find the distance how do you know that all those galaxies sit in a ring and that they're all within the same time scale in terms of that distance 9.2 billion light years ago? Well, the quasars serve as light beacons, and they shine through the gas of those galaxies. And what you can do is look at these magnesium lines. And from those magnesium lines, you can ascertain if they're within the same cosmological time frame or time scale. And so you can look at that spectra to give you that information. And it turns out it's more of a corkscrew. So I just called it the big corkscrew, but it's actually the big ring. But we're looking at it head on. And for someone who have seen my What's New, I always recycle some slides. So I'm going to recycle a couple of slides, basically theory. So So here it is. You can ignore most of this stuff. One day I'm going to simplify this slide. It comes from my lectures. But the point is, you think of the universe as a balloon, and you draw little galaxies on it, and then you blow up the balloon, that represents the expansion of the universe. And if you draw little light waves on it, and you blow up the balloon, the wavelengths stretch, and the light shifts into the red. It's called a redshift. So what I'm showing here is a standard spectrum. And as you go further back in time, the spectral lines shift. So they get that distance by looking at the spectral shift in the magnesium lines. And that gives you the distance. And it also tells you that they're all within the same region in time. So that's referred to as redshift, and it's just the ratio of the change in wavelength. Yeah, I've been meaning to chop all this off, but maybe I'll get around to it eventually. So let's just look a bit at cosmology just to get some understanding of where I'm going with this. I ended up diving into another rabbit hole. I'll show you where I dive into the rabbit hole, but I kind of have to give you a primer first. So these are the Nobel Prize winners who discovered the microwave background radiation from AT&T. Basically, when we started putting up receiver dishes for telecommunications, there was this static noise, and they're going, well, what is this? And after a lot of research, it turns out it's the heat left over from the Big Bang. So this is sort of a heat map, and we're talking very minute changes. So this is in Kelvin, which is basically Celsius plus 273.15 degrees. But you can see the temperature fluctuations are very, very small. This is 10 to the minus 6. So these fluctuations are very, very small fluctuations. So it's saying that the heat is somewhat uniformly distributed as the universe expands. Sometimes people like to say the universe looks like a sun turned inside out, because as you look back in time, you'll see the heat from the inside, right? So there's this cosmological principle which basically says that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic. So it means on some scale, it looks all the same. And when you look around, it all looks the same. So isotropic just means it's the same when you look all around. And that's so that Einstein's theory of general relativity can give you a simple Robinson-Walker metric type thing of our universe. There is some granularity in here that you can see. And that's what we're kind of questioning, but we kind of have to understand where this is coming from. So to understand that a bit, that granularity, we have to think about dark matter. That kind of has an effect on the structure or the large scale structure of our universe. This is just a quick reminder that dark matter is something we can't see. It behaves gravitationally with everything, but we can see its presence through gravitational lensing. So this, you can see here, this is a large cluster of galaxies, and you see these little arcs in here. That is light being bent by an unseen mass, because if we look at all the visible mass, it's not enough to account for this bending. So it turns out there's this dark matter there that's causing this bending. And so these arcs represent some galaxy behind. If you want to do it, if you want a dark matter magnifying glass, break off the bottom of a wine glass and just move that around on a piece of paper, and it has the same behavior as a gravitational lens. So this blue here indicates the dark matter that would be required to give these arcs. Okay, so that's just a gentle reminder. So if we do that, and we sort of make a computer model, and we evolve it from the beginning of the universe to now, what you get is these filaments. And I like to think of it this way. If you have a sink and there's dish soap in it, where the bubbles meet is where the galaxies form. And where the bubbles meet is where the dark matter is. So these blue tendrils here represent the dark matter, and the bright spots represent the forming of galaxies. So it kind of seeds things. So we're looking at ring structures and we want to try to understand, well, how do you get a ring structure? There's quite a bit going on, but basically, here's the early universe at time equal 1 second. We have our normal matter sitting here, and we have this dark matter, unseen dark matter, fairly uniform, and then over time we get this small density fluctuation in dark matter, and eventually we get this clumping. And so as the universe, so you kind of get an oscillation, and as the universe expands, you get this wave of matter like so. So you actually get these circular rings, and these are referred to as baryon acoustic oscillations. Don't worry about the term baryon. It just, in general, just simply means protons and neutrons. Anything made out of protons and neutrons. So it just means the heavier constituent particles. They call it baryonic matter because there's also exotic stuff, but we just have to think. So just gas and stuff that, you know, makes up our universe. So these models give scales on the order of 1.2 billion light years, into which we could say have a ring of galaxies condense around such a formation. So it gives you a sense that the models give that kind of predictive sense in our understanding of things. So here's another example. This is the Great Arc, which pushes our limits. The Great Arc, so if you remember the first slide, I had the circle and then the Great Arc below it. That structure, if it's a ring, if it's proven to be a ring, will be, you know, it's 3.3 billion light years across. So that's stretching things. Other structures are the Sloan Great Wall, which I actually showed earlier here. So this is just, you're looking further back in time, and here's the Sloan Great Wall. Okay. And then we have the Hercules Corona Borealis, which is 10 billion light years in span. So you can see we're stretching our knowledge of things. So I tend to finish these talks like 10 minutes before. I spent the last 2 hours reading through Roger Penrose's paper. And basically, this is one candidate model suggested by Alexei Lopez et al. You will find the internet splattered right now with this ring structure, just about every, like, Forbes, BBC, and everything else. But if you go to the actual university website, you'll get a bit more information. And so to give 2 ideas, and I ended up digging into this model. So this is Roger Penrose, which he has some really exotic ideas and things. And this is basically, you know, the repeating universe thing. Like the universe collapses and then it expands again, you get another one, this cyclical thing. It turns out that that classical picture doesn't quite work. And what you have to imagine is that our universe, it goes through what's called a acon, which is basically, it expands forever and forever and forever and forever. And then everything dies and evaporates, the black holes evaporate away, and then somehow it continues on to a new universe. So that's what's going on here. So we're kind of sitting here, everything's evaporated, and then there's this crossover to a new Big Bang. Now, they're not Big Bangs, but it gives the same effect, the same microwave background. The only difference is that gravitational information can come across this boundary. And this can seed larger structures. So it could be a potential seed. And you could maybe find that information in cosmic microwave background. So there's these ideas. So that's the conformal cyclic cosmology model. There's a lot more information there in that paper, and I tried to just keep it as simple as possible and focused on this particular subject, but there's some interesting stuff with dark matter and so forth in there. And then the other is this cosmic strings. Now, what you have to think about is that really we're describing the geometry of our universe. And basically the cosmic strings represent imperfections in that geometry. So some kind of curling or something like that. And so you end up with these strings in the early universe. And so this stringy material can end up also seeding these arcs and so forth. Okay, so these strings in the early universe. I don't necessarily buy into these theories. I mean, they are science fiction. I'll put quotes. For me, it's science fiction until you have some provable thing, but they are viable candidate models per se. Anyway, so I believe that's my last slide. So anyway, so that just gives you, I just thought in this case, sometimes I feel you give you background about models, but I thought it would be interesting to just give some alternative models that haven't been proven yet, but suggestions that might fit within the framework of things we're trying to understand. And with that, I end. Any questions? Yes.
So I know zero about this, frankly. So does that mean that if you can see what you could make into a structure, that you should be trying to explain it according to this idea by a previous expansion, that, and it would be remnant because the gravitational information is preserved from a previous?
Yeah, so basically you could imagine some kind of wave coming through that's circular in structure, and that's expanding and giving a larger structure. So within the framework of this model, it allows you to predict larger structures. That makes sense. It's really hard to describe this in an abstract sense. It's almost like I'm in another universe and I blow a little bubble, but it's a gravitational bubble. And as the universe comes to an end, the bubble feeds through to the next universe, and then and it's actually dark matter, that bubble, and then it kind of seeds the larger ring structures.
Dark matter.
Well,
Could be.
but there's a bit more explanation there, because they kind of are produced at that horizon. It's the gravity that feeds through. I don't think I'm explaining myself clearly at this point. But that's the sense of the model. It's a refinement of the oscillating universe.
And is the notion that an eon is a similar time frame?
An eon is supposed to represent forever.
Forever. So there's
Yeah.
a whole bunch of forever.
Yeah, this is an infinite. This is a universe that expands forever, and then everything evaporates, and then the next one. So, I mean, if you think about it, like when it's at the beginning of the universe, there's no time. Time is an interesting concept, and basically forever, just, it's almost like when you do calculus, you take the limit as you go to infinity, but in reality, you don't go to infinity. But time is another kind of beast. So for us, it seems to be going on forever. And then, but everything evaporates. And then what's left at this crossover is what looks like the cosmic microwave background. And it's a different kind of expansion. It doesn't have what's called inflation, but it's a rapid expansion. So there's quite a bit of gravity and quantum mechanics going on in there. Yeah. I should say that historically, for instance, if you look at our understanding of the atom and the orbitals, our initial understanding was that it was just a plum pudding model with electron pudding and plum protons in it, and that was our model. And as we got to know more and more things, we get into quantum mechanics and all these orbitals. This is a similar thing. It's like we have a cosmological model of the universe, and as we understand more and more, we try to refine it. The important thing is that there is a backwards compatibility. Physics always has a backwards compatibility. So in some limit, you should get the same results. Okay, so I take these theories with a grain of salt. My personal bias is superstring theories in higher dimensions, but that's my own personal bias. And that could be totally wrong as well. And in fact, a lot of parameters are being limited by accelerator physics. It limits the kind of particles that you can have, and even cosmological considerations also limit the mass of the particles and so forth. So even dark matter candidates are being restricted, and that restricts the models. Penrose is known for being way out there, and even he mentions his stuff is somewhat on the ludicrous side. But it's mathematically rigorous, and this is a model that actually seems to work. I probably went on a bit too much. Yes.
Well, two things out of your presentation. So the background radiation and the undulations are like in microkelvin, so they're very undulations. And then later on, you mentioned that the way you look at the way the density in the universe is kind of like soap bubbles. Way matter right now. Do you think that there's any relation between the early universe, that first, second, and kind of those undulations that the background radiation shows, and the current universe with the well, like structure?
Yeah, so this smoothness, and we have to throw in quantum mechanics and stuff, but this smoothness determines the structure, because basically the little fluctuation in temperature is a little tiny fluctuation in density. And as the universe expands, it grows. But to be consistent with our knowledge, it actually does a rapid expansion, and then it continues to expand. So every time you see the model of the universe, you will see this bell-shaped thing where it rapidly expands. That rapid expansion is required to get this texture that we see today. Okay, so you get this kind of homogeneous uniform. It's almost like how stars form, right? You have a cloud and there's little bits and pieces, and eventually over time. And here what's happening is you have just these tiny, so the temperature fluctuations represent tiny density fluctuations. And we're only seeing this at a certain epoch where we see the rate. We can't see before that. If we look at this, this is what we see, but this is what's happening behind the scenes that we can't see, because this is basically a fireball. It's like taking the sun, turning it inside out and looking at its surface. You can't see beyond that. It's a super dense plasma, but we can see the tiny density fluctuations. That constrains what goes on in here, and what we see in the structure that constrains how the universe will look then. So that smoothness down to that level basically is what gives us the structure. So that's what's happening here. This is ever so slight, and then as it expands, stuff starts to condense around it, and then we get our structure. That's the general sense. And we know the quantity of dark matter and this and that and yada yada. And so we get this model, and the structure looks similar to what we see here. So we get this foamy structure. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Allison Man to us from UBC. Dr. Mann is working on the Euclid project, and she's going to talk about that and star evolution. Sort of seems to be a topic we have tonight. And will she share her screen, or?
Yeah, she will, yeah.
Yes, I'm going to try to do that. Would you please confirm with me that it's showing up all right?
Yeah, it seems to be. Okay, Dr. Mann, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Of course. Well, first of all, nice to meet you all virtually, and hello from Vancouver. It is my pleasure to be here today to tell you about my passion and my research. So I think I'm hearing some echoes on your side. Is my audio coming through fine? Okay, I'm going to continue, but let me know if the audio is not fine. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about galaxies, and from the snippet I saw of what you were discussing, it seems like you already know a lot about dark matter and the CMB and all of that, but I would start from the basics, and I would say that I welcome your questions after the talk. So let's see. Okay, so I'm going to start from maybe at the beginning of my career, where Hubble was the Hubble Space Telescope, which is shown here, was kind of the standard, where we were doing research by discovering galaxies through deep field surveys done by the Hubble Space Telescope. And so this was one of the deepest pictures taken by Hubble. And at that time, still, when I look at it today, it's remarkable. Basically, every speck, except for the brighter things here, every speck that you see on the screen, it is a galaxy like our own Milky Way. And there are so many of them out there. And so I got very interested, not just from the aesthetics of it, but it really intrigues me how galaxies could look so different, have different colors and shapes, and I'm interested to understand the astrophysical processes that drive the evolution. And so fast forward a decade later, we have the James Webb Space Telescope that had been successful and has been taking data for a long time. And this is one of the newer images taken by the JWST towards a galaxy cluster called the El Gordo. If you speak Spanish, you will understand, but El Gordo basically means the fat one or the big one. It is referring to this particular galaxy cluster, which is one of the most massive structures in the universe. And here it is showing a lot of remarkable details. I mean, of course, this galaxy cluster is very big, so we're just seeing part of it. But what you can see in the JWST image taken by the near-infrared camera is that you see clearly these long distorted streaks, and these are telltale signs of what is called gravitational lensing. Now, galaxy clusters are very interesting to study, and I would talk more about it later on in this talk. But one of the reasons why I love studying galaxy clusters is also because they can act as magnifying glass or magnifying lens, so that they can boost the brightness of background galaxies, and that makes it very easy to discover the most distant galaxies. And I think that is exciting. And whenever you see streaks like that are distorted and elongated, they are quite likely background galaxies that have been magnified by a foreground galaxy cluster. So let's get to the very basics. What is a galaxy made of? We have seen a lot of pretty pictures, but what is it? I quite like to show this video. That is a video that zooms in towards M87 by scales of 100 million. So we know that space is big, and in order to find a constellation, then we need to look towards a constellation and then zoom in towards a galaxy. So we are zooming in towards this M87, which is a nearby elliptical galaxy. And well, it looks pretty featureless from optical light, but in fact, when you zoom in a lot more, you see a lot more going on. You see this jet that is being emanated from the very center of this galaxy. And this jet is driven by an active supermassive black hole that resides in the center. And when you zoom into the very, very core of it, we end up with this picture taken by the Event Horizon Telescope, which is an experiment that maps the event horizon towards some nearby supermassive black holes of in nearby galaxies. So all of this video is really just to help convey the vast scales that we need to map and understand a galaxy truly. So you may already be familiar with it, but in astronomy, we use a quite obscure length scale called a parsec. So for the people who don't know what a parsec is simply a length unit that is almost equivalent to 3 light years. So why do I want to bring this up? So a galaxy, when you look at, for example, the Milky Way or even more distant galaxies, they are roughly, they measure on each side roughly about a few to a few tenths of kiloparsec. And how do they relate to other nice pictures that we know, like star-forming regions like the Orion Nebula? So when you zoom into each of the clumps that you see in a galaxy image, in fact, they are made of clumps of star-forming regions, if they are actively forming stars, like the Orion, and the Orion Nebula is the birthplace of star clusters and young stars, and they are often obscured by dust and gas because it is from this fresh gas that new stars are born when they collapse under the gravity. And these star-forming regions are typically on scales of tens or to maybe hundreds of parsec. Now, you saw in this video that I showed just now, when you zoom into the very core to roughly tens of milliparsec, you will get to a supermassive black hole, and you will be able to see its accretion disk. So we think, based on the information we have, that in each massive galaxy, in its center, there is a supermassive black hole, and it is still a mystery how exactly they're formed. We have different theories about that, but we think that one of the ways that supermassive black holes put on weight is by accreting gas and stars in the surrounding within the galaxy. So this accretion takes place on an accretion disk, and there's a lot of very interesting phenomena that goes on in modeling an accretion disk. And if you then zoom in even further, that is where you see the event horizon of a black hole, within which then light cannot escape, and therefore it appears as black. But then there's very interesting gravitational effects around this singularity that gives a different shape and morphology to the event horizon. Now, if we zoom out of a galaxy, what do we get? So when you zoom out of a galaxy by roughly 1,000 times, you get to megaparsec scale, and often, not always, you will find galaxies occurring and being found in galaxy clusters. And this is an example of that. A galaxy cluster is not always a spheroidal component. You often find what is seen like filaments. And that has to do with how galaxy clusters form. So galaxies can reside in small groups and embedded in clusters. But you would also see when you zoom out of the galaxy and zoom out of the whole universe on very large scales, the universe is mostly homogeneous. That is one of the cosmological principles. So in addition to these overdense regions like clusters and groups, there are also regions that are underdense, or they are sometimes, in the most extreme cases, called cosmic voids. And sometimes you can also find galaxies here. And I think of this as like humans, are galaxies found more like in cities or suburbs or in more rural areas? And the real question is, does the galaxy environment influence how galaxies within them, how they evolve? So this is one of my research questions, and I think Euclid is well positioned to help us answer that. So that was all about the scales of a galaxy. In case you don't already know, it also helps to think about our own galaxy, the Milky Way. So if we are able to get out of the Milky Way, this is what it would look like. On the left, it is top-down view, and on the right, that is an edge-on view. So there are a few components to a galaxy, but simply put, a galaxy is a collection of stars that are gravitationally bound together. And so this our own sun, where we are situated on the Orion arm, which is one of the spiral arms in the Milky Way. And it is more clear when you look at an edge-on view towards the galaxy. The Milky Way has a few components. It has a stellar disk, which tends to have younger stars. It has a stellar bulge, which is more compact and more spheroidal. It tends to host older stars compared to the disk. And it's not just the ages of the stars that differ between the disk and the bulge. The orbits of the stars are also different, where in addition to the bulge, you also have a stellar halo, which is a diffuse collection of stars that are also on random orbits, like in the bulge, whereas these stars, they are more on regular orbits that are preferentially rotating on a plane, rather than random orbits. And then you also have globular clusters, which are some of the oldest clusters of stars that you can find in the universe. So this is what the Milky Way looks like. And now that brings me to this important fact that you already know if you're already talking about dark matter. It is important to know that whatever we see, whatever I just showed you, it is whatever that emits light is actually making up a tiny part of the mass budget of a galaxy. So if I were to show a pie chart, like here, of the mass composition of the Milky Way, all that emits light, like stars and interstellar dust and gas, planets on which we live, and a supermassive black hole, only makes up a tiny fraction of the mass budget of the Milky Way. And in fact, most of the mass in the Milky Way or in any galaxy is dominated by the so-called dark matter, which is matter that does not emit light. And in order for us to understand dark matter, we must be looking at luminous matter in order to infer the presence of dark matter, and Euclid is a mission for doing so. So back to galaxy pictures, because this brings me to my research. Galaxies are found to have different shapes. You can see some galaxies have spiral arms. Some of them have more regular morphology, like boring-looking ellipticals. Some of them have dust lane, and some of them don't. So the questions that we try to answer is, what is causing all of these differences? What causes spiral arms to form, and what causes some of the galaxies to become elliptical, and what changes the colors from blue to red, and why do galaxies have dust lanes and why some of them don't? So these are all big research questions, and really to answer each of them, I think it takes a PhD thesis because it is not so simple. But what we know from observations is that what I've just showed you, they are observations of nearby galaxies. And now with Hubble, with JWST, we're able to also survey very well the morphology and structure of galaxies in the early universe. When we look back 11 billion light years into the past, and we find that these galaxies in the early universe also have these structures already with spiral arms and dust. What may be different is that early galaxies seem to be a lot more clumpy and more compact in size. So those are interesting questions to answer. That already tells us that whatever that forms spiral arms, it must happen fast enough such that when the universe is only 2 or 3 billion years old, it has enough time for them to form spiral arms. And then in order to explain how they grow in size over the subsequent 10 billion years, there must be some mechanisms. So my PhD project was pretty much about understanding how galaxies grow in size, and I'll get more into that in just a bit. Now, I want to also mention that we are in the age of influx of a lot of data, and we are constantly trying to improve on algorithms. And in recent years, machine learning is a big part of it. And the challenge is often that there's so much data, and of course you can have algorithms, but then one also needs human eyes to help us build attributes and to train our algorithms. So in case you don't already know about it, there's a class of science that is called citizen science. It is basically a way for people who are not officially in the scientific community that can contribute to research. And related to my field, there's the Galaxy Zoo project that has been around for some time. It is basically a website where people can make an account. And what you can do as a citizen scientist is that you can help us classify structures of galaxies. So you just, you're given some prompts about, whether you think this galaxy is smooth or not, if it has spiral arms or not. And then through the contribution of many citizen scientists, actually scientists have been able to make use of these classification by human eye to write up a lot of research papers. So here is an incomplete list of research papers that have been published using the contribution of citizen scientists through the Galaxy Zoo project. I know that in other research areas, like in gravitational waves, there are similar citizen scientist projects that I encourage you to look up if you would like to contribute in some way, because all of this is really useful to help us advance our research and improve our algorithms. So now I want to take you to another technique in astronomy that helps us to understand these distant sources, because the way I see astronomy is that we have a laboratory, and the laboratory is our universe, but this laboratory is unique, meaning that we cannot have a control sample. Like, this is the only lab we have. We cannot get there. It's not easy for us to go to places to take samples. I mean, you can do it in planetary astronomy, where you can have a rover and lander and take samples, but in fact, most of the things that we study, like stars or galaxies, they're so far away, we can't travel and get samples. There's nothing to get samples of. So the way we approach our study, as you already know, is that we study light, and we study light in so many different ways. And that is achieved by building different telescopes and instruments, always better and better, in order to help us study better this light. So here is a spectrum of our own sun. In case you don't already know, a spectrum is simply that when you have an instrument that helps you to split the light into different wavelengths, that is the spectrum. And why is interesting to study a spectrum? It is because it gives us the chemical fingerprints of the light source. In this case, it is the sun. So all of the dark bands that you see over the continuum emission of the sun corresponds to specific chemical elements. Now, what do I mean by that? Here is some example spectra in the optical wavelengths, so visible by human eye. When you're able to split this optical light into different wavelengths, which is shown on the x-axis, you will find that, for example, sodium has different spectral lines compared to nitrogen or hydrogen or oxygen. So what that means is that if we're able to build spectrographs, install them at our telescope, split the light, and get spectra of galaxies, we can actually infer what are the elements that are contained within the gas or stars within that galaxy. And more importantly, you get multiple lines for the same element, right? So by analyzing the spectral line ratios, we can actually do a lot of physics to infer the physical conditions of the gas that is absorbing or emitting these spectral lines. And when I say physical conditions, I really mean, for example, electron density or the temperature of this gas. And that is very valuable information, and that's what we spend a lot of time on. Why is it interesting to find chemical elements? Well, it is because in the end, we are actually all made of stuff that are coming up from stars. So this is the periodic table. It is an astronomy version of the periodic table, meaning that the colors show you what is the origin of each of the chemical element. So in the Big Bang, there were nucleosynthesis for the simplest element, hydrogen, helium, and a bit of lithium. But then elements that are more complicated than that. So for example, human, we are mostly made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and those are coming from certain types of stars. So low mass stars make different elements than massive stars, and in white dwarf and neutron stars, they also make heavier elements, for example. So in fact, by studying the chemical fingerprints within galaxies and stars, we can better learn about our own origins. And I always find this quite mind-blowing. So what do galaxy spectra actually look like? And this is what I spend almost all my time on. Here is a simplistic example of an elliptical galaxy like M87 and a spiral galaxy. And in case this is the first time you look at a spectrum, the y-axis is showing you the flux or the brightness, and the x-axis, a horizontal axis, is showing you the wavelength. So these are pretty much optical spectra, so optical light that are split across wavelength. And you see that the spectra are so different. When you look at spiral star-forming galaxies, they tend to have strong emission lines, H alpha, that's, well, a hydrogen line, and also oxygen lines, which some of them can be used to help us to trace the accretion rate of the supermassive black hole. And And then when you look at elliptical, more passive galaxies, you see that they don't have strong emission lines. And in fact, the spectra are marked with absorption lines. So that tells us already that in star-forming galaxies versus more passive elliptical galaxies, they have quite different star formation rate, and the conditions of the gas is quite different. So in fact, I can give a whole talk about how to model spectra, but I would just say that it is from these spectra that we can measure some key information. First of all, by having multiple spectral lines, we can measure the so-called redshift, or basically how fast these galaxies are receding from us, and having a cosmological model. That means from that receding speed, we can measure a distance. So how we can map how far these galaxies are from us. That is key, and that is what Euclid is going to do for billions of galaxies. But then also from these different spectral lines, we can measure things like how old is this galaxy, how massive is this galaxy, how fast is the supermassive black hole accreting, and what is the temperature of the gas, and what is the metal content, and can we map out the different elements and what do they mean about how fast these galaxies have formed the stars. We can infer a lot about galaxies by studying the spectra this way. So another point that I want to make clear is that galaxies evolve very slowly. The evolution timescale is on the order of billions of years. So what that means to us humans that live like 100 years or less is that effectively when we observe galaxies, they are static. So we are really looking at snapshots of different galaxies at different stages of their life. So then the task for all of us is, how do we connect the dots together? Because we cannot actually look at a galaxy and let it evolve over time, because we have to wait super long, right? So for me, what that means is that we collect data of different galaxies. We make use of information that are contained in the images and the spectra, and we then put in some knowledge that we have about gravity, about thermodynamics, about quantum mechanics, in order to infer more insights about the physical conditions of these galaxies. And hopefully that helps us to piece together pictures of how galaxies evolve and get us to a place of more wisdom. So what can happen when we do this part of connecting the dots? Here I'm showing you a video of some of the best cosmological simulations. So just to explain, a cosmological simulation is a little bit like you're creating your own universe in your computer. You put in all the physics, you know, what I already mentioned, and then you simulate galaxies and gas and stars by little particles. And then you run the galaxy simulation forward in time. So here we are looking at a view, a very zoom out view of the formation of a massive quiescent elliptical galaxy. And this simulation is being run forward in time. So here we think that a massive elliptical galaxy forms from a lot of continuous mergers of smaller galaxies. So smaller galaxies merge together over time to form bigger ones. And in this process of galaxy merging, which I will talk more about in just a bit, there are interesting physics that happen. For example, you see that there are young stars that are formed in the process of galaxy merger. And that is because when galaxies merge, gas are brought to higher density that triggers more star formation, and the blue stuff is the trigger star formation. And this gas is also funneled effectively into the supermassive black hole in order to trigger an active galactic nuclear episode. So a lot of interesting things happen during galaxy mergers, but if you give it enough time, like tens of billions of years, massive galaxies end up looking like a boring elliptical galaxy, but they are boring because, well, I shouldn't say boring. I think they just have a lot of rich history. And you will see that elliptical galaxies, the stars, they are on more random orbits. And that is also because they have accreted smaller galaxies that are coming from all kinds of directions. That kind of neutralizes the rotation, so they no longer have such a strong angular momentum because it's been canceled out by all these different mergers. So I studied galaxy mergers for my PhD, and this, I think, yeah, remains one of my interests. So here I'm showing you an actual observation of a famous galaxy called the Cartwheel Galaxy. And it just looks like a nice galaxy with a ring. But in fact, with this knowledge that we understand of how, stars' orbits are distributed, people have been able to reconstruct the path of the Cartwheel Galaxy. And in fact, it is observed at a specific time of a merger where there's a smaller galaxy that is plunged into a bigger galaxy. And it is through this process that is triggering a rain of star formation. And over time, it spreads outwards. So actually, by looking at the spokes and the stars that are here, one could date the starburst and also date when this merger actually happened in the past. Here is a collection of interacting galaxies taken by Hubble Space Telescope, and I think with Webb we are finding a lot more to much larger distances. And here is another nice video that is contrasting the different stages of galaxy mergers. So this video is going to flip-flop between actual observations and simulations. So here, this one is an observed image and is showing you an early stage merger where two galaxies are merging, but at an inclined angle. That's how they look like this. And once they start interacting, then the stars orbit get redistributed. And yeah, here it's flipping to an observed image. And now back to the simulation again. And usually these two galaxies would, do a dance around each other for two or three times before they finally merge with each other. And you can see this tidal tail. Once they start interacting, there are also stars that get ejected outwards. And this is helping the nuclei to merge together. Yeah, it continues on, but I think galaxy mergers are some of the most spectacular galaxies that you can observe. And I think it's so interesting that just by looking at the distribution of the tidal tails, one could actually infer, what kind of merger stage it was in. And we can do a lot of interesting physics with this as well. And I talked a lot about elliptical galaxies looking boring. And from the video before, you will see that they result from past galaxy collisions. But I think they're boring because we have not looked hard enough. So here are two examples of what seem to look boring in elliptical galaxies, NGC 474 and NGC 3619. When you take deeper images, and you don't need a big telescope to do this, when you take much deeper images with smaller telescopes, in fact, you could see the same galaxies. Now they're not looking so boring because, in fact, we are able to detect the so-called lower surface brightness features. So you can actually see shells around them. And from these shells, we understand them to be coming from past galaxy interactions. So it is after the nuclei have merged, that is where you see the compact core. In the previous interaction stages, the stars get redistributed. And so from looking at the morphology of the stars in these shells, one could also reconstruct, what are the previous orbits, what might have the merger orientation look like in the past. So this is pretty interesting. And as I say, actually smaller aperture telescopes are better for taking these deeper images than bigger telescopes. So coming back home to our own Milky Way, you probably already know this, but Milky Way is also destined to collide with our neighbor galaxy, the Andromeda, in a few billion years. Of course, we won't be around to see it, but it's quite interesting to think about and to predict what the night sky would look then. This is, of course, a familiar view of the Milky Way right now. And we think that if you wait long enough, the Andromeda is going to, of course, look bigger and bigger on the sky as it approaches. And when Andromeda and Milky Way ultimately starts interacting, it's going to look like a mess on the sky, and there will be young stars that are formed, and things will look disturbed and irregular. We think that if you wait then another few billion years for the merger to complete, then the night sky will look very different because, well, the Milky Way and Andromeda would have merged into one giant elliptical galaxy that some people would call the Milkdromeda, and the night sky would look quite different from what we can see today. So that's pretty cool to think about. Now, I also do research on supermassive black holes. I think they're super interesting because there's a lot of physics that goes on in supermassive black hole accretion. And here is an example of actual observations of another nearby galaxy called Centaurus A. So what I find exciting about astronomy is that we are no longer limited by our human eyes. We don't just have to look at optical light. We can actually build instruments to help us capture light from across the electromagnetic spectrum. So here is a view of what Centaurus A looks like in X-ray. You can see clearly, the jets that are coming from the supermassive black hole in the center, and in the radio as well, you can see the jets. And then in the optical, you see this elliptical galaxy with a strong dustling. So this is how we can make a composite image like this. Of course, this is just an image, and in fact, we do a lot of measurements, and there are a lot of interesting questions to ask here. So here is the jets. They look more symmetric, but there are other cases, typically galaxies in galaxy clusters, where the jets could be asymmetric or they could be bent. Then the question to ask would be that what causes jets to start with? It sounds like a simple question, but we don't really understand it. And how do the jets interact with the interstellar medium in a galaxy, or even the intracluster medium? And also, how come some jets get bent as they propagate outwards, and why are they so collimated and narrow when they first come out, and then they get dispersed when they propagate outwards? So all of these are very interesting questions that we try to understand. Now, I want to switch gears just a little bit by motivating why we need to put telescopes in space. I talked about observing light across the electromagnetic spectrum. And what we know is that the atmosphere is not always kind to us, in the way that the optical light is one where the atmosphere is more transparent. But as long as you want to observe in the near infrared, or in the submillimeter, or in the X-ray or the UV, the atmosphere is completely opaque. And that is already a strong reason why we need to put satellites to go above the atmosphere, because actually we can't do those things on land. And that is one motivation for putting Euclid to space, because Euclid, in addition to having an optical imager, it also observes in the near infrared, and near infrared atmosphere is quite nasty, and it is just easier to put space satellite up there. And I want to talk about the Euclid space mission. Because I was asked to tell you more about the Euclid mission. So as you may or may not have heard, the Euclid mission was successfully launched to space on Canada Day last year. And it was the hard work of many, many people over more than 10 years. So here at UBC in Vancouver, we also had a little launch party very early in the morning, and it launched successfully from Florida, and we gathered together super early in the morning in order to watch this launch live. And here below, you're seeing basically the last shot of the Euclid mission, like less than 1 hour after launch. And that then from then onwards, it took a month for the satellite to reach L2, which is where it is currently in orbit and is functioning and taking data. I want to show you how I got involved in the beginning. Actually, when I was still a PhD student, I went to one of the first Euclid mission conference, and that was back in 2012. And at that time, Euclid was still very far away. It was like a decade away, and people were just starting to form science working groups. And of course, the engineers were working hard, and the scientists were also working hard to define scientific requirements so that the engineers could build this thing up to the standard that we need to carry out our science. And fast forward 11 years later, that was last summer. This was the last Euclid Consortium meeting just before launch. And I want to say that the Euclid Consortium, well, it is an ESA-led mission, but it is still an international collaboration that has more than 1,600 scientists from more than 300 institutions in 70 countries on 3 continents. So there are roughly 30 Canadian research professors and the students and postdocs involved in the Euclid Consortium. So I'm one of them, and I think I am lucky and also grateful in the way that a lot of hard work had been done. People have worked on this mission for more than 10 years, and we are actually right now at the time where Euclid is starting to take data, and yeah, it is just fascinating. So what is Euclid going to do? This is a little video. So Euclid is going to be a very effective survey. It's going to survey 1/3 of the night sky. And here is showing you on galactic coordinates where it is going to survey over the next 6 years. So the gray regions is where it will survey. You will see that it avoids the region on the galactic plane and also on the ecliptic plane, because there we get a lot of, well, contaminating light, and we are actually trying to detect background galaxies, so we don't want to deal with the contamination. But let's see, this is a better graph that shows it. So here, the light orange is showing you the portions of the sky that is covered by the Euclid-wide survey. So that covers 1/3 of the sky. And then the dark orange patches are showing you the Euclid deep field that is covering about 10% of the observations. And both of this is going to happen in the next 6 years. And what it's going to result in is that we will end up with a gigantic catalog of billions of galaxies and stars, where we get decent images of them, so almost like Hubble Space Telescope quality images in both optical and near infrared. But more importantly, there will be redshift measurements to a good fraction of these galaxies. And what we can do with that is that we can build 3D map of galaxies of the cosmic web. And by doing that, we can actually accurately map out the matter distribution in the universe. So remember what I said earlier, we cannot study dark matter directly or dark energy, but what we can do is that we can look at luminous matter. And by that, I really mean these billions of galaxies, and we're going to get accurate positions and also distances too. And that helps us to map out the cosmic web structure. So the Euclid goes to near infrared, and that allows us to detect these billions of galaxies up to about 10 billion light years of look back time. So that's a good fraction of the universe cosmic history. This is what we will get. We will get all the galaxies, and that helps us to map galaxies that are in clusters, in groups, or in voids. We will have very accurate environment characterizations of these galaxies. And from that, we can infer the dark matter distribution as well, because even though dark matter does not emit light, it serves a very important purpose. Because it contains most of the mass, basically luminous matter moves according to the gravitational potential defined by dark matter halos. So pretty much by looking at where galaxies are and how fast they're receding, and how fast they're receding from us and from each other, then that helps us to map out where the dark matter is distributed. And more importantly, we can also use this catalog of galaxies in order to map out the expansion history of the universe. And that is important because I did not talk about dark energy. It is one of the biggest mysteries, as you know, in astronomy. And we can only map out dark energy by looking at the expansion history of the universe. And typically that means measuring distances to great distances, to great accuracy of a lot of objects over the whole sky. And Euclid is a mission that is going to give us just that. So it would help us advance our understanding of dark matter, dark energy, help us test theories of gravity. Could we have gotten our physics wrong? We will know when we have the data. And I'm going to focus a little bit on what I'm planning to do with Euclid, because I'm not a cosmologist. I study physics in galaxies, and for me, this Euclid catalog is going to be a treasure trove where basically people have discovered billions of galaxies that have been never observed before. So that's going to keep us busy, because we can then study these galaxies. For example, with GWST, we can follow up the interesting ones and then to study them more in detail. So here is one of the first images taken by Euclid that had been released. Here I'm showing you the Perseus galaxy cluster. It is a well-known galaxy cluster that is made of more than 1,000 galaxies. Here we're just looking at a part of it, and this is relatively close. The Perseus cluster is only 20 million light years away from us, and this image was taken with only 5 hours with Euclid, and that shows you how efficient of a survey instrument Euclid is, because where Euclid beats JWST and Hubble is that it has a wide field of view, so it is able to map large areas quickly, and that makes it an efficient survey instrument. So what is interesting about galaxy clusters? I've alluded to this earlier on, but I want to get back to this. So I've shown you here an optical and near-infrared image. So we're really looking at the starlight of galaxies in this galaxy cluster. What if we put on our multi-wavelength eyes and look also in X-ray? Here is illustration where all of these blobs you see, they are individual galaxies, and we're trying to portray a galaxy cluster. When you overlay the X-ray emission in purple, what you see is that actually in between galaxies in a galaxy cluster, there's the so-called intracluster medium that is emitting strongly in X-ray. And what is this intracluster medium? It is, you can think of it as a hot plasma soup that is about 1 million degrees hot. These are very diffuse electrons. So it's a plasma, they are ionized gas, and galaxy cluster is made of this hot soup. So we should think of galaxies as being immersed in this hot plasma soup. So it's quite interesting because when stars form, they form from cold molecular gas of like 30 Kelvin, right? So how do stars form when this cold gas is immersed in this hot gas? There's a lot of interesting thermodynamical effects that could happen there, and I will show you in just a bit. And typically, the most massive galaxy in a galaxy cluster also has active galactic nuclei that emits in jets, and this jet can go out to galaxy cluster scale, and it stirs around the intracluster medium. So when you look at the intracluster medium, when you look at the X-ray, it is never uniform. You can actually see bubbles and also wakes and disturbances, and that has to do with how the jets from the supermassive black hole is stirring up the intracluster medium. Even though the supermassive black holes are so small, the influence can be felt so far apart, and that is very interesting. So here is another artist's impression of how the intracluster medium can be important. So it is portraying you an effect of what is called ramp pressure stripping. So it is describing how gas can be dragged out from a galaxy when this galaxy is infalling into a galaxy cluster. And this drag happens because precisely in a galaxy cluster, you have this hot X-ray emitting gas, and it is this galaxy, as it falls into the galaxy cluster, it is experiencing a hot wind that is kind of blowing out the gas within the galaxy. So those, if I get back to this, you can actually find these galaxies, and they can be called jellyfish galaxies because of how they look like. And by studying jellyfish galaxies, we can actually learn more about the intracluster medium and also the gas within galaxies. And that is important because we think that RAM pressure stripping helps to eventually shut down star formation in galaxy, and you do that by expelling all the gas. So it's like blowing all the gas out of the galaxy and it has no gas left. So that is something interesting to study. So what exactly am I going to do with Euclid? I'm not working alone. As you already saw by now, astronomy is a very international and collaborative research field. We are doing something difficult and requires a lot of resources. So it makes sense that we work together. And here at UBC, I have a research group. And here, these are two of my PhD students. And both of them are working on galaxies in different ways. So on the left, I have a third-year PhD student, Leah, who is studying how galaxies evolve differently depending on whether they are in clusters or groups or voids. And more importantly, why and how are they evolving differently? And then on the right, I have a first-year PhD student whose plan is to use the Euclid mission to identify the best ways to find galaxy clusters. And in fact, we are not just looking at galaxy clusters. We want to look for progenitors of galaxy clusters, meaning we want to look for the so-called protoclusters in the first few billion years of the universe. And we think those proto-galaxy clusters could look very different because they don't yet have this intracluster medium. They don't have this X-ray emission. And we think that the galaxies within galaxy cluster is going to be a lot more star forming than present day clusters, which tend to host passive elliptical galaxies. So there's a lot of exciting questions that we hope to be able to answer. And yeah, my student is a big part of it. And I just want to end by saying that I think the universe holds a lot of mysteries for us, and there's always a lot to learn. And I think that by staying curious and humble, then we are open to learning more. Thank you for your attention, and I am happy to take questions.
So much, Dr. Mann. Are there questions? Scott.
Hi, Dr. Mann. You were talking about the low surface brightness features of the galaxies, and you said that they were best done with small telescopes. I'm curious what you mean by small telescope. It may mean something different for you than for us, perhaps.
Okay, when I say small, I just mean maybe less than 4 meters in diameter.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it does not hurt. If you have a telescope, maybe you should try. Actually, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dragonfly project, but the Dragonfly project is a project led by researchers in Toronto. And what they have done is that they basically put an array of, I think it is like Canon or Nikon kind of what you can buy off the shelf. They have an array of those cameras, and those are the best for looking for this low surface brightness features. And the reason why bigger telescope is not optimized for these features is because there's so much scattered light that you don't have when you have a smaller aperture telescope. So I would say, oh, it does not hurt to try, right? Now that you know which targets you can find this, maybe you can try it.
Excellent. Okay, thanks.
So I can ask a question. What kind of thing do you think explains why some galaxies have spiral arms and some don't? That was one of the things you were interested in, or thought this Euclid project would address, or help you address.
So that is a very interesting question. So maybe to the first one, why do galaxies have spiral arms? Actually, I don't think it is solved, but I think based on our understanding, what we know is that when galaxies are born, they have rotation, they have angular momentum, and that has to do with how the collapse happens. It flattens to a disk, pretty much like how planetary systems form, right? You collapse, you have a preferential direction, and you have a disk. So there's some initial angular momentum. Now, whether having rotation means spiral arms, it is a big jump. And there are different theories, but one of the leading theories of how spiral arms form on a galaxy with a disk is has to do with certain resonances or kind of waves that propagate. So as their rotation on the disk, so stars that are on rotating orbit on a preferential plane of the galaxy, that they could experience kind of density waves that could cause this spiral arms to come and go. There's another theory for spiral arms, but I don't think it is fully resolved yet. Now, to the question of how do galaxies or that are disky or have spiral arms become elliptical-like? I think the answer is actually coming from galaxy collisions, because it is not just how they look. I mean, they look more round, elliptical galaxies, but when we have the information from spectroscopy, for example, for these particular galaxies, we can also measure the orbits of the stars. So not individual stars, but we can get a sense of, are the stars in this galaxy on orderly orbits or they're on random orbits? What is clear is that these galaxies have, kind of orderly rotation, and elliptical galaxies tend to have random orbits. So that means that the transition, when galaxies transition from this orderly rotation state to random orbits, there had to be something that kind of reduces the angular momentum. And we think that a lot of galaxy mergers could do that, because you have galaxies coming in at different directions, and it is rare to have two co-rotating galaxies merging on the same plane like that, right? Probability is higher for galaxies to merge that have different planes of rotation. So that could help to reduce the angular momentum. So we think that the answer is galaxy mergers help galaxies to lose the angular momentum and help the stars to redistribute the orbits to become more random.
Active galactic nucleus?
Sorry, I think I missed the first part of the question. Did you ask about active galactic nucleus?
The cloud of hot gas emitting X-rays, where does it come from?
Here. So this is again an interesting question, because the supermassive black hole itself is so compact. It's only, a dot, right? So in fact, what we think is happening is that when the supermassive black hole accretes actively at a high rate, like the way I like to describe it is that supermassive black holes are messy eaters. That means that when they accrete stuff onto the black hole, it has to emit a certain fraction of energy away in order for it to accrete easily. So it's kind of a feedback process. And this energy that is being emitted comes out in different ways. It comes out through the jets by, actually ejecting plasma. The other source of energy dissipation comes out as ionization cone, because this accretion disk is, again, very hot. It's like 1 million to 10 million Kelvin in temperature, the accretion disk. And it is so hot that it can ionize the gas close to it within the galaxy. And we think that there actually, we look for active galactic nuclei by the so-called ionization cones, which are not shown here, but it's basically energy from supermassive black hole accretion as it accretes, some fraction of energy has to get out for it to accrete effectively. And in this process, it is heating up and expelling gas from the host galaxy. And in fact, we think that it is this feedback process that helps to eventually shut down star formation in galaxies once it's able to cook the gas up to hot enough temperature and destroy all the molecular gas, and there's no more fuel for star formation.
Hello, Dr. Man. Just on your slide where you were demonstrating the different compositions of the Milky Way galaxy, it was that pie chart. You were showing
this one?
Yes, that one. Yes, thank you. Something I've always wondered is how do they determine the percentage of dark matter that makes up the Milky Way when it is invisible? You know, I've always kind of wondered how that is able to be determined. Let us know. I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. Actually, I don't think I have a slide for that, but a simple answer for you would be that we know that dark matter does not emit light, but what dark matter does is that because we have so much mass in dark matter, it basically sets what we call the gravitational potential, or in more simpler words, the stars can feel the presence of the dark matter through gravitational interaction. So the answer to that is that actually one of the first evidence for dark matter is by looking at the rotation curve of the Milky Way. And how that is done is that once we're able to take spectra of different stars in different galaxies, different stars in the Milky Way, or of the gas, atomic hydrogen, we are able to make a map of how the Milky Way is rotating at different distances from the galactic center. And the surprise then, discovery by Vera Rubin, was that the Milky Way is rotating differently than what we expect if there was only stars that make up the mass. So it was that discrepancy that causes her to label that there must be more matter than we can see that is emitting light, because the stars and the gas is moving in a way that we don't expect it to. So one of the evidence for dark matter is actually the rotation curve of galaxies.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? If not, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Mann, for a really stimulating talk to a bunch of people who came or saw you on Zoom, came to the meeting or saw you on Zoom, and I think we all enjoyed ourselves. And we wish you good luck with the Euclid project, and maybe you'll come back in a year or two and tell us more. Thank you so much.
Certainly. Thank you. Thanks.